Thank you for coming. Disappearing. So if we start with introductions, Jemma, do you want to introduce yourself first while I just finish fiddling?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Jemma Wilkinson. I'm an educational psychologist working in Rotherham. I've had an interesting time during lockdown as I've returned to work from maternity leave, which has been a very bizarre experience. Baby downstairs and working upstairs is a new one for me. But yes, so that's who I am. Louise?
Okay, so I'm Louise Graham. I work at Rotherham Parent Carers Forum. I'm the operations manager there. I'm mum to 2 children, so definitely have some worries and feeling quite anxious about the return to school. They're both teenagers, both in secondary school. I've got one really keen to get back, one not so keen, really loved being at home. And I'm also a member of the Genuine Partnerships team and often work alongside Jemma and Scott, and I'm a parent representative on that team.
Thanks, Louise. And I'm Scott, and I'm an educational psychologist working in Rotherham, and I work with the Genuine Partnerships team, which is a collection of parent and practitioners that work closely together to think about how to make things better for young people and families within our local area. And we also support in other local areas as well, developing co-production together. So I guess that's a little bit about us. I'm just going to flick through a couple of slides. So if there are any technical hitches, we're being supported by Contact kindly, that will be able to help us, because this is a system that we're not particularly used to, but it looks quite straightforward. So hopefully there won't be any, and it'll be absolutely fine. There is going to be time for questions particularly at the end. So there is a function for you to be able to ask questions on the toolbar that I think you should be able to see. So please feel free to type in questions there, and we'll respond to any that we feel need an immediate response, or we'll wait to the end where we can look through any questions that have come through and attempt to address them the best that we possibly can. So as we said before, we come from the Parent Carer Forum in Rotherham, the Educational Psychology Service, and we come together under this group of practitioners and parents and young people as well, under Genuine Partnerships, to think about how we work together well. So we're looking at this idea of returning to school, and we know that actually this idea of returning to school for some young people is longer than it is for others. Some young people continue to access school during the pandemic and the shutdown. So it's a very individual experience in a lot of ways. So we're going to consider the return to school. We're going to look at some research that we did in our own local area that we know has been emulated in other places throughout the country about what's important for young people, looking at their priorities for going back or returning to education. We're going to think about emotions and the emotional experiences that come with the uncertainty that many young people and families are currently facing. And we will consider sort of emotions and times when they can take over and what that may be like. And then we'll think about our own feelings and trying to manage our own experiences so that we can help other people. And then we're going to look at a specific approach to considering how can parents and carers support a young person who is finding things a little bit difficult. We know that it's a really challenging time and that there aren't any definitive answers, because if there were, I'm sure many people would have already communicated those. So we're going to think about what we can do to support in these instances. So then we've got our lovely illustrious leader, Boris Johnson, probably being asked about what social distancing looks like, and then using his arms to figure out the space. Gets there in the end. And moving on to this slide. and Louise.
Okay, so as I said, I've obviously got lots and lots of worries as a parent about returning to school. Although my children don't seem concerned at all at the minute, not sure it's quite sunk in for them. And I suppose what I'm thinking about is the impact the return to school is going to have on our home life. When they're upset and worrying about things, they tend to bottle things up whilst they're at school, and they won't speak to staff during the day, but then it kind of spills out when they get home. So I'm busy, and I'm kind of envisaging that this might be what happens. Of course, I might be completely overthinking this. That might not happen at all, and we might just go straight back into school with, I'm feeling really uncomfortable about things at the minute. So September is going to bring young people back to school, which is likely to cause some difficulties for children and young people and the families. And we need to remember that some young people have been out of school for longer than others. So my son is not actually attended school for almost 6 months now, whereas my daughter did go in odd days in June and July. So where we're at, whatever children have done, school's going to be different when they return. For example, there's children who've been entitled to a place during lockdown, and for them there's even going to be changes. School's likely to be more busier, there's going to be more young people returning, which could bring a whole mixture of emotions. There's also all sorts of potentials that young people and families might be facing, and schools and settings might not have finalised what things are going to look like and how things are going to work. We've got things such as staggered start and finish times, which I have had communication from my school, and this is something I've got to deal with. So one of them is at school from 9:15 till 3:30. The other one is at school from 9:15 till 4. We live quite a way away, so I do have to drive them in. It looks like I'm going to be spending an hour a day in a car waiting for one or other child. So that's the first thing that I've got to overcome. There might be bubbles, there might be different break times and lunch times for young people. They may not be with all their friends, there may be different adults around. In fact, it's making me quite anxious just thinking about all of this. So how our young people are going to feel, I'm really not quite sure. So I'm hoping throughout this presentation, Scott and Jemma are really going to give us some advice as to how to cope with some of these feelings and these emotions and these stresses. And in a sense, I think what I need to do is just go with the flow, as there is so much uncertainty. And as we know, government guidance changes all the time. So what we think might be going to happen and what school have sent out and communicated might need to change in a couple of weeks. I know just on the news right now, they said that no masks were needed to be worn in school. And then I've seen articles that this might be changing. So there's lots and lots of uncertainty around at the minute. And also, I suppose what we have to remember is that the response of young people returning to school is going to be really, really different. Some are going to find the transition back quite scary and difficult. I think my son will, because he really, really doesn't want to return at all. He's actually loved lockdown, the lockdown period, and being at home. So I think, although he doesn't seem concerned at the moment, I do think when he does go back, it's going to be a huge transition for him. Whereas my daughter, she's really, really keen to get back, wants to catch up with her workmates. She's going into a final year for her GCSEs, so he's really keen to get back. Other kids might have a mixture of both. And I suppose what we need to remember as parents is it's important to acknowledge their feelings and follow their lead. We also need to remember that schools are trying their best to figure things out. They're having to think about what measures to put in place, and some will be further forward than others. It's likely that school staff are going to find it a really, really challenging time to try and manage everything. And like I said, they're possibly going to have to change things as time goes on and as they reevaluate and maybe attempt to improve how their school's running. So yeah, because of all of that, it really is quite a daunting, anxious time. So Scott, I'm hoping that you and Jemma are going to kind of offer some support for this and try and give some strategies and advice to get through this difficult time.
So Louise. So yeah, so I think it leads us into kind of nicely starting to talk about the kind of things we know about young people, and from families' perspectives, particularly from the work that we've done with families and young people in our local area around the things that are important to them. So we did a piece of research with the young people and families asking that very question. So what is it that's important to you when thinking about returning to school? And there were a number of areas that really kind of stood out in terms of the responses, and they're kind of highlighted in those top kind of boxes on there. So relationships and friendships, learning, worries about family and safety, emotional needs and time to prepare were really key ones. And there is lots of kind of variability in the responses within each of those areas, and some tensions that exist between them as well. Relationships were really important to young people, and from the work that we did, we could see how the separation from friendships had been quite challenging for many young people. And one of the things that they felt was really important to them about being able to go back to school was being able to see friends and spend some time together with other people. That separation and isolation during lockdown has clearly been quite challenging for a lot of the young people. Learning, there were different elements to learning, some in the sense of some young people just wanted to get back on with learning and wanted to be able to have their teachers around them to be able to support them and the equipment they needed to feel as though they were making progress in their academic subjects and learning in general. There were other young people, though, who also had concerns that linked into their emotional needs around, will I be expected to catch up with everything that I've missed? So there are different kind of concerns, but learning is a real kind of prominent theme that came from the question that was asked. There was definitely a sense of worry, worrying about family and keeping people safe and being safe. And young people being concerned around ensuring that they're protecting themselves and their family members as well, and asking questions around spacing, masks, social distancing, numbers of people in school. So there are lots of kind of thoughts around that. What was really, really important to some of the young people that we spoke with was ensuring that people understood what it had been like for them during this period, and so having access to emotional support as and when they needed that. And the other essential kind of element there is about preparing for changes and being able to say goodbye to their old kind of friends if they are transitioning out of that particular school in particular, and having time to kind of get used to new routines and new environments and things. And as Louise has already mentioned, the uncertainty around current things means that that's really, really challenging. So that preparation, along with the fluidity of the current circumstances and how things might change, could be quite difficult, and linking then to some of those other areas that we've spoken about there. And Louise, we kind of asked this question to families and parents and carers as well, didn't we?
We did. So obviously at the same time you were doing this research, Scott, Rotherham Parent Carer Forum were working with our local authority, and what we wanted to do was to produce a frequently asked questions to go on the local offer. So we were tasked with asking our members kind of what their thoughts were, what were their priorities, what was important to them, and it was with a view to producing a frequently asked question guide, as I said, to go on the local offer that people could log on and kind of have a look. So we wanted to preempt what people were going to ask so that the answers were there. And I suppose what was really, really striking is that when we did our research and compared it with yours, the priorities that were identified by the young people were exactly the same priorities that were identified by their parents and carers, exactly the same things.
So some real common kind of thoughts and ideas coming through. So that uncertainty and priorities were really kind of the centre of what we were thinking about when talking around how we prepare this presentation. So moving on to the next slide, Jemma.
Yeah, so I think, can you hear me okay? I think that, as Louise has said, you know, at the moment, there's this huge sense of uncertainty, and that has an impact on all of us. We all have some sort of desire to have at least an element of control about what's going on for us and for our children and for the people that we love around us. And so when we feel that that's kind of taken away, it can lead us to feeling quite anxious and stressed. And we might not necessarily be able to recognise that immediately in ourselves, but I think as time's gone on during lockdown, we've perhaps all become a little bit more aware of that need. I know that for me, I'm quite a sociable person, and I was okay with the first announcement of lockdown, and I was okay when it was extended another 3 weeks. But I do remember feeling very tetchy in the lead up to kind of like the announcement that extended it again, and I found myself kind of snapping at my partner, and he wasn't doing anything wrong, but it was just because I knew that I was anticipating some information that was going to have an impact on my life, and I had no way of managing that until I heard what it was. So having those emotions at the moment is so natural, and I think we can worry that that we should feel in control of things and we should be able to hold it together. And actually, it's really important that we can show that feeling anxious about this situation is not something that we need to be hiding or keeping away from everybody. But when we feel stressed, we can, you know, this can present in lots of different ways. So we can have physical effects. We might be the sort of person that kind of tenses up. I know when we were talking about this presentation, Scott was saying about how he gets very tense in his shoulders. I know that I get a bit fidgety. The more stressed I get, I kind of move around a lot more, or can't seem to kind of settle. But we can feel sick, we can get that knot in our stomach. So we have physical effects when we are feeling these emotions. And one thing that we can do is we can get quite stuck in our thoughts, and they can become quite repetitive. And again, that links into the fact that we can't control them. So we don't have an answer, which means that we keep asking the question in the hope that maybe an answer will just descend on us and we'll have one of those light bulb moments. And in this situation, in this pandemic, we have less opportunity, I guess, for some of those light bulb moments. So we have to be really aware of the thoughts that we might be getting stuck into. And again, it links back to the things that we have control about. So we often get stuck in thoughts where we feel we have less control, and that then moves our focus away from the areas that we perhaps have a little more control over, that we can have a positive impact on, and there are active things that we can do to help the way that we're feeling. And it's about kind of being aware of that and trying to move into thinking about the things that we can control. And we are going to go on and talk about that a little bit more. We can also project out our difficult feelings, so we can kind of put them onto other people. My partner, bless him, does get a raw deal, because when I am feeling tetchy, he does get it in the neck. And sometimes he'll say to me, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nothing's wrong." And it's because I can't put it into words, but I know that I'm taking out my stress on him. And you know, that's what we're there for as partners. There are times when he does that to me and I help to contain his feelings around that. So I don't think we should feel too guilty about that, but maybe we need to just be aware that that can sometimes happen. And we can sometimes do that with other people that we don't know. And that can lead us to getting quite stuck again in our thoughts, and that kind of the idea of cognitive fusion, where we're kind of going around in circles, because we can get angry at people, often strangers. I know, especially at the beginning of lockdown, you know, when perhaps some people weren't following the rules as strictly as we were, you can kind of feel quite angry and annoyed at those people. For my sins, I sometimes look on Facebook, and there are a couple of neighbourhood groups, and there was lots of talk about different people that weren't sticking to the rules or were getting too close to people when they walked past them on the street, and we can kind of project that anxiety that we have onto other people. And we can sometimes avoid situations and subjects in order to help ourselves, or what we feel is a way of helping ourselves to kind of not think about them too much. And we need to be careful that we don't then build that up to a point where actually it's something really big. And if we'd have managed to kind of have a conversation initially, we might have been able to nip those feelings in the bud, so to speak. But if you don't talk about something, it can become bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can get to that point of explosion where it then looks like, you know, you've lost your temper, or you've got to breaking point because somebody walked past the pair of shoes that you put on the stairs for them to bring upstairs, and actually it's nothing to do with that, or that might have been the tip of the iceberg, but it was lots of other things really. And it's all about the fact that we are feeling out of control of our emotions, and we're feeling stressed because of that. If we move on to the next slide, this is looking at thinking about our own feelings a little bit more. So like Louise said, she's got anxieties about her children going back to school, and that's okay. You know, we can't make everything perfect in the world, and often we as a society, we can sometimes try and think that, or try and make out that there are certain emotions that are positive to have and there are certain emotions that are negative to have. So from a very young age, we try to not be angry, or we try to not worry about things, but actually these emotions are necessary, and they're there for a very important reason. Our anxiety, for example, keeps us safe when we are, you know, when we're growing up. It helps us assess a situation. If we didn't worry about anything at all, then we could find ourselves in some really tricky situations. So it's really important that we kind of remind ourselves that it is okay to feel worried. The emotions that we're having are okay to have. What we can focus on is what we do about it. And it's not necessarily that we control it, but it's about being mindful that it's there, thinking about how we can best manage it and how we can go about life whilst knowing that that emotion is something that we feel and we experience. So we need support when we have difficult experiences. We do need to share those with people. Our children share them with us. You know, you are, like Louise said, lots of children will hold things together at school, and then they come home and you become the sounding board. And sometimes that's an absolute verbal explosion, and other times it's a young person that goes into themselves, and you then have to work to try and kind of tweak out what it is that's kind of on their mind. And for some young people, that's quite a physical outburst of emotion as well. So we all need support to deal with difficult experiences, and adults are no different to children in that. So, you know, it is important that you talk to your spouse, talk to your friends, seek those opportunities to take that time to say, actually, I am worried about this. I am worried about my children going back to school. I'm worried about how I can support them, because we can't make everything better. We can't take away everything that is going on at the moment, and we can't say to our children, this is definitely going to be the way that it is. As Scott and Louise have both said, you know, we see that changes are happening constantly because of new information that's coming through, because of reviewing actions that have happened and thinking, actually, maybe that needs to be tweaked. So we can't really say to our young people, this is it, this is what it's going to look like. But what we can do is talk about the intentions that everybody has. And the intentions will always be the same, which is to make this as safe and make everybody here as safe as possible. But if we don't have those conversations with people that we have around us, then we can't contain those emotions for our young people. So we can be very cautious as parents of taking time for ourselves. And I'm not saying kind of go out and get yourself a massage and spend half a day shopping, but if that's what you can do and that's what you like doing, then absolutely fabulous. But taking a little bit of time each day to make sure that you just have a little bit of time to stop and think, you know, trying to get that hot cup of coffee where you can sit and just contemplate how you're feeling, so that you can kind of check in with yourself to be able to support other people. And having an acceptance that there are some things that we can't control, but there are lots of things that we can, and it's those things that will make this situation as positive as it can be for you and for your children going forwards. And for everybody, you know, it's kind of thinking, okay, well, I can't control what, you know, if you've got a young person who you are worried that they're going to go back to school and there's going to be lots of of physical contact. You know, they're going to be hugging each other, they're going to be playing sports together and not following the social distancing rule because they're tackling each other at football or whatever it is. That's not something that you can control. But what you can control is the conversation that you have with your young person about trying to be mindful of those social distancing rules and trying to stick to them whenever possible. But maybe you can control what they do when they get home from school, making sure that they are washing their hands and things like that. There are things that you can control, and they're the areas that we need to be focusing on. So if we just go on to the next slide.
Jemma, could I just add something there?
Absolutely, yeah.
Just reflecting on what you're saying about control. So something that I felt I needed to do that was proactive is, because I've got all these worries and anxieties, I felt that I needed to share them with my children's school. So what I did, I actually contacted my son's head of year, because he's in a mainstream secondary. He's got so many subject teachers that talking to them all would be really quite difficult. So I contacted my son's head of year and I just kind of asked if I could discuss some of my worries and concerns and what I envisaged might happen. And she was brilliant. She really reassured me. She promised that as September comes, we can work through things together. We'll just keep talking. Anything that crops up, we'll be able to deal with. That kind of supported me into feeling that I can just go with the flow and we'll see what happens. I know that I can work with school to kind of deal with anything that might crop up. So I would just reflecting on what you said about control, that felt like it kind of gave me a little bit of control back. Okay, I'm okay now. I know we've got a plan. I know we can work through stuff together. It'll be fine. So I just wanted to share what I've done.
Yeah, that's great. And it shows that kind of connection as well, doesn't it, between people, and ultimately that is one of the things that are really going to help in this situation, having those conversations. And you know, like you say, Louise, saying I'm worried about this, I'm worried about my young person coming back into this environment. And there's families with lots and lots of different setups. We've got colleagues who have partners, for example, who are or who have been you know, isolating and now not having to. But there is a very real worry for those parents about their children going back and bringing something home and the impact that that'll have. And it's really important that we have that communication, because I think there were lots of people in that situation. I think until you have those conversations, you can feel quite alone in how you're feeling. And it's really important that schools are aware of how people are feeling, because it is going to impact on actions. And I think teachers, I've got a couple of friends who are teachers, and they share those worries, and they want to make the transition to school as positive as it can be for the young people that they're supporting. So that's a really, really positive step to take, I think. So this slide here, this is about kind of how to mindfully deal with negative emotions. So it comes from the work of a gentleman called John Gottman. It's from the Gottman Institute, and we're going to talk about John Gottman a little bit later as well, when we think about how we can work with our children and how we can best support them. But it's just quite a handy visual, I think, to help us think about how we can deal with our own emotions and our difficult emotions. And like I mentioned before, there's been a bit of a drive perhaps in the past to ignore emotions or get rid of emotions. You know, we hear rules like or terms like anger management, about having to manage our anger so that we're not experiencing it. But actually thinking about it in this way is often much more supportive, really. So it's about turning your emotions, turn towards them. So don't try and run away from them. Kind of go, okay, this is how I'm feeling. What can I do about it? How can I work through this? Often if we try and put anything under the carpet, brush anything under the carpet, it's still there. And like I said before, it can get bigger and bigger and bigger. So actually acknowledging that you have this emotion that you perhaps don't want to experience is a really important first step. And labelling it as well. So Scott's going to talk a little bit more about that. And we've got another visual that hopefully will be quite helpful. You know, kind of saying I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling nervous about this, or I'm feeling really angry that I've been doing lockdown very strictly and following the rules, and there's people that clearly aren't. You know, it's okay to have those emotions. So accepting them, accepting that they're there, and also realizing that they come and go. You know, we don't constantly experience an emotion. And that's the same with the emotions that people might deem as positive emotions. So we're not always happy. We might experience periods of happiness and they're fabulous and they can make life brilliant, but everything is ever changing. So when we have feelings that perhaps we don't want to have, we can focus on the fact, or we can think about the fact that we know that there will be another time where that emotion is not the biggest, or is not the one that we're kind of having to manage as actively. Think about why you might be feeling it. So, you know, what is it? Is that, can you think of a trigger? And it might be that, you know, this pandemic is hard, and that in itself might be the trigger. It might be that this pandemic is really hard, and you know, having the kids at home whilst I've been trying to work means I've not got on top of, or I feel that the pile of washing is getting really, really big, and actually looking at that is making me feel more anxious, because it's making me feel like I'm not in control of what I like to be in control of. So is there a particular thing that we can work with there? I say that because behind my screen I have 2 piles of washing, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I really need to get on top of them. They're all the baby's clothes as well, which is the case, isn't it? And letting go of the need to control your emotion as well. Sometimes it is about saying, you know what, it's here and I know why it's here, and I'm going to try and do some things to alleviate that, but I am also going to continue with what I'm doing. I'm going to go about my day. We can't always control everything that's going on around us. So hopefully that visual can kind of help to guide us through that. And I think the underlying message is that it is okay to feel those emotions. It's the next steps that we need and that support us with managing them. And we're going to talk about those now. Well, Scott is, I think, over on the next slide.
So a real sort of central element of the current experience is that uncertainty, and we've talked about that experience of wanting to control things and the difficulties that can arise from being really fixated and focused on things that are beyond our control, even though they may create difficult experiences for us. And there are some things that we can sort of really consider doing and attempting to put in place to be able to support the return to school. So there are a couple of things that we just wanted to run through and talk about a little bit. And the first one being about normalising the return to school. This is something that happens every year, in the sense of the summer holidays come and then there is a return. And at this moment, we're kind of in the midst of what would be part of the usual experience for a young person. Yes, it is centred within a much more unusual and very strange and potentially upsetting experience as well. But as September comes around, we can help young people by really kind of focusing on normalising this experience of going back to school. This is what we normally do. This is what usually happens. There is a return to something that feels a little bit more like the routines that we used to have. And trying to give positive messages about that. Now, it's very difficult to kind of think about what would be a positive message. For some young people, a positive message is about returning to school and seeing their friends again. But we know that for some other young people, that's not necessarily a positive message. And so when we say give a positive message, I can't tell you exactly what to say. Nobody knows your young person like you do, and you are probably in the best position to be able to say what would be a positive message for my young person. So identifying something that they may be able to see as being good about returning to school. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. I know it's going to be difficult. Some young people, as I said, will look forward to seeing their friends. Some young people will look forward to being able to get back into doing some learning. So trying to find what would be the positive messages for your young person is a very individual thing, but important where we can do that. This idea of trying to make it special, so it being a start, something new, and maybe sort of thinking about having new pens, new pencils, something that makes this moment a little bit special. And I'm not suggesting that people go out and spend a fortune, something very sort of simple that would make this experience of returning to education, returning to school, feel special. We know that sleep's really important, and I'm sure everyone is aware about building routines and trying to get those in place as quickly as possible, so that there is a kind of sense of getting back into that waking up for school and going for school. So waking up at a time that would allow that to happen as well. And that can be tricky. We appreciate that. And also that attempt to share what you know. So as Louise was kind of saying, that she was asking the people that she has relationships at school with about what that would look like, and then being able to share and prepare your young person in that. This is where your classroom will be, this is who your teacher will be, this is the number of people that will be in your classroom, this is when your break time will happen, if you know those things. So we appreciate that that can be very difficult when schools are still attempting to figure out a lot of the processes and systems that they're going to have in place for when that happens as well. But as sharing as much as we can help with that preparation. However, we are still going to be having to contend with this really difficult sense of uncertainty and the emotional experience that that produces for us and for the young people around us as well. And so actually what we really wanted to kind of focus on is thinking about, well, what do we do in those particular circumstances? How can we help young people who experience really, really difficult emotions, particularly in these uncertain and difficult times? And actually, one of the approaches that we really kind of advocate is around emotion coaching, and hopefully some people will have heard of this already. So you may have some awareness around this, and we use it with practitioners in schools and when we're working with families as well, to think about what can we do when a young person is feeling overwhelmed, when they are finding things difficult. And all of those things that we said at the start about thinking about our own feelings and thinking about our own avenues of support and being reflective and mindful of our own experiences is really important when it comes to thinking about how do I support a young person who's feeling overwhelmed, and using emotion coaching in this particular way. We recognise that actually there is an evidence base for emotion coaching as having really positive impacts for young people, both in short term and long term, in supporting their understanding of their feelings, in supporting them in recognising that their emotions are okay and it is fine, and also helping them to recognise that it is possible to feel overwhelmed and come out of the other side. So to feel that it is actually something that isn't going to destroy me in some way. I am going to be able to survive, even though it's hard, even though it's difficult. So emotion coaching can really help in this. Many parents will be natural emotion coaches, and that will be really great. But this gives you also a framework and a number of steps that can really help in identifying what it is that you may already do or what you can do to support your young person when they're feeling distressed or upset or overwhelmed. It's very much about being in the moment. So emotion coaching is about being there with that young person at that time when things are hard, and thinking about how we can support them in understanding their feelings and how to manage them. And also really, really important in recognizing that all emotions are normal and they just come to us, and there is very little we can do about them. They come to us, we experience them, and then they pass. And they may come back and they may have different levels of intensity, but we can't help but have them. As much as we don't want to have some difficult experiences, they still unfortunately just keep coming. So emotion coaching, as I said before, has got a research basis for being able to highlight the positive impacts that it has for young people, both in just managing their instances of feeling upset or overwhelmed, and for their long-term ability to be able to cope with difficult situations as well. And the great thing about emotion coaching is that there have been a number of steps that have been identified. When we support practitioners in places like school thinking about emotion coaching, we usually use 4 steps, but in John Gottman's original kind of material, working directly with families and parents, which is where this approach originates from, there were kind of 5. So you may have a different experience of the number of steps, but I'll run through these as kind of essential elements that if you're going through these processes, these stages, these steps, then you're adopting an emotion coaching approach. So that first step, again, it's linking back to what we said right at the beginning about being aware of our emotions and when our feelings take over. And it's important to be able to do that, although it's very difficult, so that we can be mindful of what kind of impact that might have on us. And also it will help us to be able to also recognize the feelings of the young people around us as well. So that awareness is really key. And that next step is about connecting. So a moment when a young person is feeling upset or overwhelmed, how do we connect with them and show that real empathy for their experience, finding something within ourselves that really connects with what might be going on for that young person, that connection, being there, being often for some young people, being physically close to them, not always, but sometimes being on their level and really showing that you're there with them, reassuring, those words that we use to support that young person. It's okay, I know it's hard. And then it leads into that third kind of step. So we want to validate and try and name those feelings for those young people. We know that the experience of uncertainty for ourselves is hard. The experience of uncertainty for young people is hard. And we can validate that by saying, yes, actually, in that situation, I would feel exactly the same. It's really, really normal to feel like that. And yeah, why wouldn't you? And trying to name that feeling as well. So we can help young people to understand their emotional experiences simply by giving them the language in which to recognize and be able to communicate those things. And there's some research by Dan Siegel, I think it is, who talks around naming to tame emotions. So we simply, by the element of naming emotions, we become better at being able to manage those experiences and those feelings. So that third step is really about saying, yes, that these are really difficult emotions, and actually, yeah, I would feel the same at that point. And I think you might be feeling, and trying to give a word for that young person. Now, I know that at times that can be really difficult to think of emotional language at any one moment that's beyond maybe a core few words that we might use. So the next slide that I'll show you in a second is an emotions wheel, and you can find these easily on the internet, which give a number of different words that can be used that are associated with different emotions. And it can be useful just to kind of have something like that maybe close to hand when trying to kind of work with a young person around their thoughts and feelings at that time. So validating and naming those feelings. And the fourth step is an optional one. It depends upon the situation and the circumstances. We talk about setting limits to behaviours, not to emotions. We are not setting limits to emotions. We're not saying that you can be sad or unhappy for this amount of time. That's not what this is. It's setting limits to behaviours. So sometimes when we are feeling overwhelmed or stressed, it may come out in particular ways that we might do something. We may, for example, when I talk with some young people, their response to feeling upset and distressed is to run away. And actually, that's the behaviour at times that we want to kind of limit as much as possible, because it might not always be safe to do that. So when we're talking about setting limits, we're talking about to behaviours. And it's where it's necessary, because there will be lots of times when there isn't a behaviour to set a limit to. There isn't something that we can identify and say, right, well, we can't do that. If a young person is feeling upset or overwhelmed about the idea of returning to school, there isn't really a behaviour to limit. It's accepting that they feel that way and that it's okay to feel that way. And then what we may do is then move on to that fifth step of exploring with that young person what could potentially make this better? What could happen that would make it this situation feel a little bit easier? And it's very difficult for some young people to kind of think about that. And so we attempt to support them in some ideas about what might make things better, whilst also allowing them space to be able to say what kind of things may work for them. Inevitably, as we go through this process, it's not simply a linear set of steps, although I've presented it in a number of steps. It's not simply a straightforward work from 1 to 5 and you'll be fine. There will be the need to return to different stages and different moments, because we might get to step 5, ask a young person about what would make this better for them, and they may say, in this context, never going back to school. And actually, the reality of that is probably something that we can't do or promise. And it probably reflects actually that young person is still at a different step in this process. So actually, they're expressing a difficult feeling in saying, I'm never going back to school. And actually, what we probably need to do in those circumstances is go back to connecting with them and validating again. So going through those stages again, talking around those feelings to ensure that they understand and recognize that it's fine to feel like that, and it is a normal thing that happens. And so maybe some of the other steps may come after that point again, but it depends upon the moment. There may need to be a little gap between those steps. So you may have that connecting and empathizing, that validating and naming at one point, but you may not choose to go on to the other steps to explore some of those options for how to kind of make this feel better until later. It's important to try and do that, but it's picking that moment as well. And so this is a number of processes and stages that we can engage with at different points to keep returning to what our young people feel and how to help them with those experiences as well. And on the other side, there's just a few little phrases that people might kind of find useful as prompts. They're not an exclusive list. There'll be many other things that parents say that are incredibly useful for our young people as well. So moving on to the next slide, as I said, trying to name lots of emotions, something like this, it can just be quite helpful in being able to think of different words that relate to different experiences. So a young person isn't always mad, although they may appear to be. Actually, it may be that they are feeling something different that appears in that way. And it's being able to name that emotion that will extend their ability to be able to say what's going on for them and communicate that in future instances, but also give them a sense of what is happening to them that they can start to learn to manage. So that's essentially the stages in emotion coaching. And that's the approach that we would really advocate for when trying to support a young person's emotional experience, particularly in these really difficult times. There isn't an answer at this moment. Whether there will ever be one is very, very uncertain. But we know that actually through coaching young people in this way with their emotional experiences, it can have a positive impact for them, and it is something that parents can do with young people. There are obviously lots and lots of things that we can't do, and we can't control, and we can't impact upon. But this is one kind of example of something that we can engage in with our young people to support their emotional experiences. Okay, so just to very quickly summarize before we kind of move on to looking at if some of those questions have come up. Really, it is accepting that we don't necessarily know what this return to school will be like. We accept that, and we accept the emotional experience that comes with that. And we accept it so that we don't drive our energies into things that we cannot change, that we cannot do anything about, because they will become very consuming. And it may mean that we are focused in one particular area whilst not necessarily focusing on those other things that could potentially help us to feel a little bit better, the things that we can do something about. We have to recognise that there are a wide range of feelings on returning to school. Some young people will be very excited to go back to school, and some young people will not be. Equally, some parents will be happy for their young people to go back to school, and others will not be. So we recognise there is a mixture. We have to be very mindful of our own feelings, so that we are able to contain, hold emotionally the experience of other young people. Recognizing that there are some things we might be able to actively attempt to prepare for and plan for, and in those instances they can give us ways of feeling a little bit more in control and a little bit better about the experience. But there are inevitably going to be those times when things are out of our control and they change quickly, and we want to be able to provide a means of being able to respond to those emotional experiences, because we cannot change that uncertainty. And emotion coaching, those 5 steps, gives us a framework for being able to address, to work with, to coach, to support young people when they are feeling distressed or overwhelmed in some way. So that was a quick summary. Jemma,
well, I don't know if it's just me, but you just keep getting a little bit robotic, Scott.
Okay.
I heard you say my name. Did you say, have I got anything to add?
Okay, sorry about that. The connection's gone a bit slow. Yes.
Yeah, okay. No, I think with regards to kind of the summary, it's, as you know, as you said, it's that idea that it's okay for us to be feeling worried about this situation, just as much as it is okay for our young people to be feeling worried about this situation. It's still an unknown, and there's an element of having an awareness that people in school will also be feeling probably slightly uneasy and worried about this situation. So it's kind of being in that space really, and thinking about the things that we do have an impact on and we can have a control over, using our support networks, like Louise said, reaching out when there are things that, you know, what can we do? We can contact school if that will be helpful, then that's something we can do. And the emotion coaching is a guide. One of the questions that's come up is around emotion coaching resources for children with communication disabilities and complex needs, and there is quite a lot of stuff out there. Emotion coaching can be really language heavy, so for some young people you can use lots of language to try and help talk them through, but ultimately it is about the connection and the connectivity that you can have with an individual. So for a young person perhaps who struggles to process language, and we know that children can really struggle to process language when they're in heightened states of different emotions as well, that can, their ability to process language can decrease even more so. It's pulling in the strategies and the communication needs that signs and symbols around you, and for me that kind of initial the bit that's around that kind of going, it's rubbish to feel this way, and that doesn't have to be said. You know, you can show that, and you can help somebody to kind of think, oh, okay, it's okay to have this feeling, because that in itself can make such a difference. I still remember one of the first times I ever kind of actively used emotion coaching with an individual, and kind of was really focused about trying to use emotion coaching, and she was really upset, and we were actually out doing an activity, and they were trying to get her to go through a really dark tunnel, and I had to share her worries about that, to be honest. Not a big fan of like stream scrambling or any of those kind of things myself, and she said to me, this is rubbish, I'm gonna be rubbish at it. And I said, that's a really horrible way to feel, isn't it? And I get it. And she just looked at me, and I thought she was going to say, are you mad? Because usually I would have tried to make that situation better, and I didn't. I said to her that this is rubbish, this really sucks, doesn't it? And we got through it, and we did both end up in the tunnel scrambling around, but that kind of connection, and we don't need lots of language for that. for some young people, it is about just being present with them. But yes, online, there's lots of resources, and we can send through some links, so we can add some links up to things that would be helpful for that. We've got
Emotion Coaching UK might have some. No, they've got a website.
Yeah, they have some good resources, and there are some of our schools that have children with quite complex needs that use the emotion coaching framework. We've got another question here around a young person who already really struggles to share their emotions with adults, and getting the school to kind of join up with parents on the idea of emotion coaching steps. So I think one of the key things when a young person struggles to share their emotions with other adults is usually there is an adult, often a parent, who they feel more comfortable to talk to. But one of the first steps that we would try and encourage staff in school and adults at home to do is label their own emotions and bring that talk around emotions more into their everyday life, a bit like a commentary on what you're doing and what you're feeling. So, you know, oh, I'm really annoyed because this might be, for example, in school, we might kind of say, no, I'm really annoyed. I spent ages putting this paper together, and then I've gone to the printer and I've printed it all off and it's all smudged, so it doesn't look as nice as I would hoped it would have. And that might seem, so I'm feeling annoyed about that, or I'm feeling frustrated that I put all this work in and you've not got what I really wanted you to have. And even though that might seem like a really blasé thing that actually we could ignore completely, by generally bringing in talk about emotions into everyday language, we normalize experiencing emotions. And again, as a society, as a culture, we tend to try and not talk about negative emotions. So actually it's about starting a bit in front, a bit further away from where we are. And it's not a quick fix. It's not a quick fix at all, but over time it can have a really positive impact. And I think it's about trying to keep those lines of communication open with school staff, because it can be really hard. I used to work at a youth group for teenagers with autism, and they do all sorts of stuff in the youth group. They'd eat curry. If we had a curry night, we'd go on residentials and they'd stay away from home, and they'd get themselves ready, and they'd, you know, change their underwear, and they'd go on zip wires. And then we'd talk to the parents and they'd be like, well, they'll only eat a particular types of food at home, you know, and things like that. So and sometimes I was like, oh my goodness, this young person who can be really kind of out there and seem really happy when they're with us is obviously not as happy when they're with us, because they are struggling at home and that's where they feel safe and they're letting that emotion out. So so it's important to try and keep those lines of communication open so that staff are aware, because nobody really wants young people to be feeling negative emotions or emotions that we would rather they didn't experience as often. And it can be hard, but my advice there would be to just kind of keep going with it. And there's lots of ideas around emotion coaching in schools, so there are lots of things that that schools can be supported with to do that. There's also a question around what would you suggest to help with stress-related toilet regressions? I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Anything toilet-related can be a real challenge. My advice personally would be to try and focus on the stress side of it. You know, what is it that they're feeling anxious about, and working on that, and just reminding them of the skills that they have when it comes to going to the toilet. But our toilet habits and going to the toilet is an area that we often have control over. And so when we feel like we're losing control in lots of other situations, we can find that there are lots of young people who will revert to toilet regression in some way, whether that means that they might smear, or they might refuse to go, or try and refuse holding going to the toilet. So we see that kind of, it's often a way of trying to take control of a situation that they feel uneasy in, or uncomfortable or unsafe in. And so kind of working on the bits that they can control and helping them to feel more in control in those other areas hopefully would then have the knock-on effect that you would want around kind of them getting back to the toileting situation that they were in before. Don't know if anyone else has got anything to add about.
Yeah, the other kind of like flip side of that, I imagine those times when young people can't control their toileting, unfortunately, because of the level of stress. And actually, there is little that can be done about that except to reassure them that okay, I know it's not very nice, but it's okay. And then, as Jemma sort of said at the start, attempting to address where is that emotional experience coming from, and is there something that can be done to support around that as a means of helping to prevent those times when accidents might happen, and the young person has an experience around when that accident happens as well. So sometimes with toileting accidents, you can get a sense of distress or shame that go with that, and the reassurance that's needed to go with saying it's okay, whilst trying to think about what were the triggers for this? Why might this young person be experiencing that? And are there things that we can do to make that experience a little bit better so that these accidents may not happen as much? Are there any other questions?
There's just one that's come through. Lots of sleep issues, really worrying about going back to school, say bedtime, becoming quite upsetting. So what can I do leading up to bedtime?
So looking at, yeah, I would say looking at a really kind of predictable routine that includes all sorts of calming approaches. So something that is well established, that may involve, depending on the age of the young person, it's difficult to kind of say, but for younger people, that kind of routine of bath time, story time, warm milk, something which is very comforting, warm, and it involves that moment of being able to connect together with a secure parent figure, to kind of have that time to be able to reassure and kind of support in those emotional experiences. Those are equally needed for older young people as well, but establishing routines of bath time and story time may be a little bit beyond their age at that moment, but having that time to be able to engage in something that is both a nice thing to do and something that the young person is interested in, that can provide a space and an opportunity for some of those thoughts or feelings to be kind of considered. What we can't do is take them away. They're going to be there, but we can reassure them, young people, that these kind of thoughts and feelings are not permanent either. So we talked earlier about accepting the ways in which feelings come and go, and one approach to supporting older young people particularly is to help them to think about recognizing that these feelings and emotions come, but they also kind of go as well. Now, depending on how we respond to them can really influence how quickly they kind of go, or how long they may stay with us or last with us. So when we get really focused in on a particular emotion, like we said before, that kind of really fixated on something, that cognitive fusion, we can continue to generate that experience over and over and over and over and get really trapped in that thinking when there is very little that we can do about that. And again, it is helping young people to see that actually that feeling will go, and yes, it is difficult, and we can think about what things it may be possible to do to be able to kind of help mitigate some of those experiences that go with that. And then in relation to bedtime, having again that routine as much as possible, even for those older young people, to be able to kind of get used to that process of going to bed, getting up early, things like that.
Yeah, I think as well, perhaps something to add around that predictability is an element of a predicted response. So, you know, if it's something that you know that there's going to be a particular question asked, or there's going to be a particular worry that's expressed because it's happening each night, having a bit of a script that you can use and you can fall back on will help you to go into that situation feeling like you are more able to manage it and support your young person with those emotions, because seeing your seeing anybody in distress isn't nice, is it? So I think if you kind of, if not that it's always great to anticipate a negative situation, but if you've got a bit of a bank of, okay, I know that one of the worries is that he's going to be in a different class to the key worker that he's known, he's in the bubble that he's in, it's a different key worker, for example, then you can have a response to that, which can be the same night on night that the question is raised or that the worry is expressed, because we know for lots of our children, having that predictable response, because sometimes asking the same question again, or often asking the same question again and again and again, is a way of a young person finding out how much we mean what we say and how sure we are of that response. So we can't, like Scott said, we can't take the worry away, but we can say, you know, we know that it's not going to be as nice, that you've got a different key worker, however your key worker is still in school and they're going to be helping other people to stay safe, and this is the person that you can talk to. So and as things change, that might change as well, but for now we know that there is somebody else that you can talk to, and you can always come home and talk to me as well. So having that kind of response that you've got in your kind of bank of resources really can just help you feel a little bit more comfortable about going into that situation as well. Okay, how do you deal when your child does not want a routine, as this feels like being told what to do? Yeah. I feel like this sometimes happens with my partner as well. I don't know. You know, like if I'm trying to tell him that this is the way we're going to do things, I find like planting a seed so that it becomes his idea makes it much more bearable. Or I get my own way that way often. I think there is that need, isn't there? There's a desire to be a grown up. We have that. We want to be. It comes back to being in control. You know, they don't want their mum or their dad or their auntie or their grandparents or whoever it is to be saying this is what you need to do, because at 12 you're a grown up, and you know, you should be able to be in complete control of your life. I know I definitely felt that way at that age. So it is a little bit about planting the seed with them and letting them have an element of control over what their routine might need to be, because ultimately we all have to go to bed and go to sleep, and we all have to do certain things in an evening and in a morning before we get off and leave the house for whatever reason. That isn't going to change. As she grows up, it won't be school, but it'll be some sort of work. So it's just about kind of letting her be involved in that plan. You know, if you want something written down, if that would be helpful, then do it together. Think about, you know, and perhaps present her with a couple of options as what do you think? We maybe could do it like this, or we could do it this way. Either option would be fine because it's going to get the job done, but then it's giving her that control over which option she takes. And we know that if young people are involved in setting targets, whether that be what their routine looks like or what they want to achieve in school, or, you know, whatever it may be, if they're involved in that decision to set those targets, and they're more invested in it, and the chance of them kind of feeling more empowered to move forward with that is increased. So that would be my kind of suggestion there. I don't know if anyone feels any differently.
Yeah, I reiterate that sense of choice, as much of choice within limits as I sometimes describe it. I know a friend of mine has a daughter that she has to limit to 3 outfit options in the morning, because if she says, what do you want to wear, the world of terribleness occurs as she gets free rein in being able to choose things that for my friend don't really go together and she can't wear all at once. And wanting to go to school as a Disney princess has often occurred. So limited choice choice within a range of things. So it feels very much to the young person that, and they do have that element of opportunity to say what they want to happen, that experience of controlling that to some extent within a boundaried kind of approach. It's obviously important.
And again, it's having that element of this is an emotion that we all experience, isn't it? This is that kind of feeling overwhelmed with options at times, but also not wanting to be told what to do is something that I know I strongly feel that as an adult still. If someone tells me I can't do something, for example, I feel the kind of like, oh, what do you mean I can't do that? And sometimes I don't even want to do it, but I might find myself thinking, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So it's not a feeling that other people don't experience. Would secondary schools do emotion coaching? Yes, is the really simple answer to that. Secondary schools can do emotion coaching. And yeah, we've trained quite a few secondary schools in our area.
Yeah.
So and there's information, like Scott said, there's an Emotion Coaching UK website, but there would be, or there are likely to be, provisional services within the authority that would have an awareness of that. So the Educational Psychology Service might be a place to start to ask them if that's something that they do, but there's lots of training around for emotion coaching. But the website and looking at John Gottman's his website has got lots of tips and strategies as well that anybody could access and have a look at.
Okay, have we about covered all the questions?
Yeah, just another one's coming around, encouraging a secondary school to engage with the emotion coaching. On the Emotion Coaching UK website, there's quite a lot of evidence about the positive impact of emotion coaching on behaviour, or what schools might term as behaviour. And on the impact also on grades, which can be quite two big trigger words for secondary schools: improved grades and improved behaviour. And there's been quite a bit of research, like I say, around emotion coaching with that. And I think one of the first big bits of research was actually done in a school that was labelled as schools for children with social, emotional and behavioural difficulties, and they saw a really dramatic increase in school attendance by pupils, in their attainment, and in staff well-being, as well as a decrease in the kind of situations that perhaps would typically have become or ended up in a level of conflict. So on the Emotion Coach UK website, there's some really good resources that you could show your secondary schools, or share that information around the impact that it can have.
Yeah, I think some research by Bath University as well that highlights all of those things, and the fact that staff feel better able to manage difficult emotional situations, and recognise that improved relationships with parents and families when the young people recognise or felt that the adults around them could respond in a way that they felt was supportive. There's lots of good research to advocate for including that as an approach to supporting emotional well-being.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
done?
I think so.
Okay. So we'd like to say thank you ever so much for joining us for the seminar, and goodbye. Thank you.